Welcome, everybody. I'm Eva Yazhari, the CEO of Beyond Capital Fund. I'm here today with two of my colleagues to talk to you with them about our most recent energy report, which we launched in July in New York City, and will also be previewing in other cities in addition to being available on the thought leadership section of our website. It is such a pleasure today to have Ben Grozier, who's our full-time associate on the ground in Nairobi. Hey, Ben.
Hi, Eva.
And Nitin Vaish, based in the Bay Area, who is an advisor to Beyond Capital and an expert in the energy sector. Hey, Nitin.
Hi, Eva.
Welcome. So in a minute, we're going to dive into a few questions about the energy sector, particularly among the bottom of the pyramid, which is an area that Beyond Capital focuses on. Our investments also span other sectors in India and East Africa, and but for the purpose of today, we've focused on the energy sector, but also within those same geographies where we invest. And our goal in putting together this report was really to showcase our work and the background work that goes along with our due diligence and pipeline sourcing for our investments into early stage social enterprises that need our capital the most. I wanted to start off the interview with a statistic and just telling you all that there are 1 billion people, that's 1/7 of the world's population, that do not have access to electricity. That is an incredible number. And we'll get into some of the details more today about how and what some solutions are for those individuals. But it really is a staggering number to think that 1 billion people don't have access to electricity. So I wanted to start off with you, Nitin. Both of you have worked on this report and kind of made it what it is. Can you discuss the state of the off-grid solar energy sector today? And can you tell us a little bit about how the sector has evolved and developed in recent years? And maybe just first, if you don't mind defining what kind of off-grid solar is, that would be helpful for the audience as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Eva. Thank you. Let me just start off with the problem you touched upon earlier. More than 1 billion people don't have access to energy, which, as you said, is a pretty staggering number to begin with. And if you start looking at people who don't have access to energy, these are primarily in Africa, in Southeast Asia. And the solutions these people have today for off-grid solutions is primarily kerosene. And these people who are living at wages which are $1 at best, maybe $2 a day, they're spending about $37 billion a year just on kerosene to have access to basic lighting in their houses. So that is what the solution has been or was maybe 10 years back or so. And if you start thinking about this, that by itself is it's not healthy, both for individuals and also for planets. Spending that much money on kerosene has led to, by some estimates, almost 800 million premature deaths in these places in the world. Along with that, the amount of CO2 which gets generated because of kerosene is about 300 million tons a year. So the solution which has been in place for energy access in these markets, it's not healthy, it has been costly, and frankly, not good for the planet. That is what the state of the world has been for past, I would say, 15, 20 years or so, but things have been changing. So if you start looking at things in developed world, the solutions probably are grid extension, which in these markets has been pretty expensive. We're talking of tens of thousands of dollars per kilometer for centralized grid extension. Along with that, the infrastructure in these places has been pretty poor. So the solutions we are used to in developed worlds are practically not feasible in these markets. So the solutions have been more around decentralized solutions and primarily solar. So if you have to go back to mid-90s or so, pioneers like Selco in India or Delight in Africa, they came up with solutions which were portable solar lights, which were sold to these people and to these customers. And we are talking of very basic solutions, which were probably 10 watt, give or take, and were costing $10 to $20 a piece. But since then, the industry has evolved from basic lighting to something what is called as solar home systems, which is not just lighting, but as you can imagine, the penetration of mobile phones in these markets is extreme. In some cases, almost 80%. So these systems have evolved to not just lighting solutions, but also charging and also small appliances. So in this case, we are talking of price points which were roughly $200 or so for the entire unit. And as these customers have evolved with these products, with these systems, their lifestyle has changed. And what is fascinating now is this whole category of products, which is called as large solar home systems, which is evolving faster. So in this case, customers are talking of solutions to replace their diesel gensets, having solutions for 12-volt appliances in their households. So it's not just phones, lights, but also fans, refrigerator, and change in lifestyle for these customers. In this case, the price points have been higher, typically north of $200 for a single unit. So I think the industry has evolved over the past 20 years or so from basic kerosene-based solutions to something lighting, and then now to these systems which are changing the livelihood of these customers in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia primarily. I think where industry is going now, just to touch upon that briefly, is majority of the foundation around hardware, be it solar panels, batteries, or just power electronics has been laid out. In fact, the cost of these, the hardware has been coming down pretty rapidly, almost 6% year over year. While the cost of alternative, in this case, kerosene, has been going up almost 4% year over year. So if you start thinking about this with the hardware layer put in place, what becomes more important is having the best solutions for the customers. And where the industry is going is to become more customer-centric and have solutions which can be scaled up, both from services and financing standpoint. And when done right and at scale, I think the status quo of using kerosene will be history pretty soon.
Thanks so much. That's definitely a useful kind of picture of the landscape. Ben, let's turn to you. Can you talk a little bit about some of the business models that you're seeing on the ground in Kenya and compare them to those that we've also seen in our pipeline in rural India as well?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that Nitin teed kind of this conversation off pretty well with that summation. So I'm going to try and direct this question pretty specifically to the solar home system manufacturers and distributors in both regions. And just to, I guess, sort of jump off from where Nitin left off there, because the industry really has come about in essentially what is the last decade, 8, 9, 10 years, some of the earliest players, particularly in East Africa, but in India as well, have really had to sort of establish the entire value chain themselves. So everything from product development and research into product manufacturing of the solar home systems, shipping and logistics of those solar home systems into the region, customer acquisition, and importantly, customer behavioral change, and then all the distribution logistics of getting solar home systems out to well, both the urban, but as well as kind of the peri-urban and the rural areas of the region, and providing post-sale service and support. So you have some of the earlier players. Some of these names will be familiar to people who know the space a little bit, but Mcopa, Bbox, D-Light, OffGrid Electric, those sort of names, particularly in East Africa, have really built up pretty significant barriers to entry through that entire sort of 8, 9, 10 year process of establishing a market for themselves. So I guess just to jump in maybe a bit more specifically with Mcopa, they've now deployed about 500,000 solar home systems across Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. The bulk of those in Kenya. They're operating an agent network of over 1,000 sales agents across the region. And those sales agents are working out of close to 60 to 70 retail locations, specifically around Kenya. So agents will go out to rural communities, kind of give product demonstrations and assess interest in, or sort of build interest in the M-Kopa products, and then bring people into the retail stores to kind of demonstrate what's on offer in terms of the sort of M-Kopa product and system selection. The other big names I mentioned earlier operate kind of very similarly. And what you've actually had in sort of a second wave of businesses that have come into the space over the last couple of years is business models that have had to adapt basically to a market that's been built by these early guys. So a company that specifically comes to mind is a company by the name of Village Energy, which operates in Uganda. A newer company than the bigger names I listed earlier, but finding its niche in specifically the distribution side of this solar system network. So they have explicitly built retail shops across Uganda to serve as sort of the retail points, distribution for a variety of the manufacturers, and basically are exclusively providing installation services and post-sale services and support. I think that type of dynamic is just representative of the types of niches that businesses coming up in the second wave of sort of interest in the solar home system sector. That's representative of those types of companies.
Thanks. And just going kind of one step farther there, can you talk about, and Nitin touched on some of the products, but can you talk about some of the products in brief, and also, you know, maybe taking the perspective of somebody living in rural India or East Africa, what are the products available, and but also more so, what are the costs of these products? So how are they affordable? And I know Nitin touched on some of the kind of financing options as well. It would be good to kind of circle back there.
Yeah. The product range for a lot of the large companies now is very broad. So there are still, as kind of Nitin alluded to, the very basic solar lamps. D-Light has a lamp called the A1, which essentially retails at $5 to $10 if you were to buy it in cash. And then there's sort of a variety of products that step up the spectrum. So you can get portable lamps, you can get smaller solar home systems that maybe involve sort of a couple LED lights and a mobile phone charger. You can even step up those systems even further to the M-Kopa 400 system, which is relatively new and includes LED lights, mobile phone charger, radio, as well as a 17-inch TV, which is sort of the kind of latest option available to those who can both afford the cost of the products and the financing, as well as those who have sort of the availability to the distribution network of these companies. So that's sort of the spectrum at the moment. In terms of the cost, as I said, the earlier stage, it's about retailing about $5 to $10. And as Nitin alluded to, actually some of the large solar home systems retail at $200 plus. And you're looking at costs of upwards of $500 often, which has mandated a new thought process behind kind of financing these products and providing pay-as-you-go option to customers.
Great, thanks. So Nitin's last question here, and switching back to you, where do you see the sector going, and what are some of the innovations and developments that you are excited about as somebody that's watching the space? Yeah,
I think it's pretty fascinating how rapidly the sector is evolving. And I think it's it's pretty interesting to draw some parallels to what is happening in the US solar market to the kind of solutions which are getting developed and deployed in Africa or in India. And I think if you were to look at the US solar market, roughly 10 years back or so, it was pretty small. It is still small, but what led to growth of US solar market was financing options, third-party financing, for example. So that is when companies like Solar City, Sunrun were founded. And frankly, that led to growth of US solar industry by more than 50% year over year. In fact, some of the investors in these companies, in particular, Double Bottom Line, DBL Fund, was an investor in Solar City. And in fact, they are also the investor in OffGrid Electric, the company which Ben mentioned earlier, who are deploying solutions in Tanzania. So I think becoming more customer-centric and evolving their business model towards that is one big trend. Now, for that to happen, there are a few things which have to come in play. One is just working capital, because the industry still is very much focused on products, and the supply chains usually go back all the way to China. So unlocking working capital from manufacturing all the way to suppliers and then distribution is a big challenge. And having real easy access to working capital is one of the big pain points to scale the business up, which are typically mom and pop shops in these markets. So companies like Sunfunder, who are developing solutions for working capital, is pretty interesting and relevant for scale. Along with that, having access to new sources of financing, along with these products, as Ben said earlier, majority of these solutions still are pay-as-you-go solutions, but they have to be underwritten by the company. So having access to new sources of financing becomes pretty important. And there are innovations happening on that front also. So companies like Bbox, which again Ben mentioned earlier, a couple of years back, they were the industry leader to have the first offering for securitization of the ABS assets, which were backed by these solar home systems in Africa. And they raised about $500,000, which were backed by these systems, which was very innovative, especially for developing markets where we think the risk is high. But things like these have been somewhat more of a norm in US solar markets. So having those kind of solutions developed is very interesting to scale the business up further. One thing which is a big pain point in these markets is understanding what is the risk profile of these customers. And frankly, unlike US or European customers, that information is not available. But companies like Lendable or Tala, they are gathering mobile data points from these customers on the ground in Africa, which are hundreds of data points to develop a typical credit profile of these customers, so that service providers can have access to those solutions and then offer right solutions. So having those solutions around credit analysis is also important to scale the business up. And lastly, I think I talked about this earlier also, new business models beyond lanterns, beyond home systems. When the grid cannot be extended, what else can be done? And there are really good companies who are developing solutions around either microgrid or mini grid, which is more community-based, such that it's not just household, but the entire community can be electrified and have access to energy. So companies like PowerHive, PowerGen are developing these solutions. So I think everything from working capital to understanding the risk profile of the customers and new business models, all of these trends are very interesting and very relevant for both making impact and changing the livelihood of these customers on the ground who don't have access to energy.
Great, yeah, and certainly I could speak, and beyond capital perspective, we are constantly looking at companies in this space and excited about the opportunities to come to invest in businesses that are improving the lives of individuals living under the poverty line. So with that, I'll say thank you to both of you. It's been a pleasure, and thank you to all of you watching, and looking forward to the next report that we launch, and looking forward to seeing you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.